Great, welcome everyone. So this is the third of 4 sessions on supply chain interventions. Thank you to everyone that's coming to all of them. It's quite a marathon. So this is a set of sessions that are organized by myself. I'm Robert Heilmayr, Rachael Garrett, Eric Lambin, Kim Carlson, and Ximena Rueda. And this panel in particular is going to be focused on supply chain interventions in Brazil. We have one more in the last session today that's going to be more focused on Indonesia. So if that's something you're interested in, we would love to see you there as well. But just in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Sam, who's our first presenter. And yeah, we'll try and maintain a little bit of time at the end so that we can have a little bit of conversation. So for all the speakers, you can look to Eric and he will give you a stern face and a sign whenever you're running out of time. Great.
Great. Cool. Okay. So my name is Sam Levy. I'm a second-year PhD student at Boston University, although I'll be shortly moving to ETH to finish my PhD. I'm going to be presenting today on the role that market share has on zero deforestation commitment effectiveness at reducing deforestation, with a focus on the cattle sector of the Brazilian legal Amazon. And there's been a lot of talks so far about the importance of tropical forests, that the deforestation of them is driven by commodities, and that this commodity risk is being managed by zero deforestation commitments. So I'm going to zoom straight in to what these commitments look like in the Brazilian cattle sector, the major driver of deforestation in Brazil. So as a slaughterhouse, the main point I'm focusing on, there are 2 types of commitment. There is MPF TAC, and there is the G4 agreement. And these both function basically as market exclusion mechanisms, using government data on property level deforestation to exclude farmers from supply chains, from their supply chains based on whether they've deforested or not. And then there are 3 differences I'm just going to quickly outline. So TAC was signed between the Public Prosecutor's Office and slaughterhouses, so the risk there is actually legal repercussions. Well, the G4 agreement was signed between Greenpeace and the 4 largest slaughterhouse meat packers in Brazil, so the risk there is reputational. The second is that they have different spatial and temporal extents. So the G4 agreement began in 2009, implemented entirely in 2009, and covers the Amazon biome, while TAC began in just the state of Pará in 2009 as well, and then spread out from there to cover the entire legal Amazon, a region 20% larger than the Amazon biome in Brazil. And then the third is that these actually are committing to different things. So the G4 agreement is a zero gross commitment, so these companies aren't allowed to do any deforestation, or they're committing to do no deforestation, or buying no deforestation, while in TAC is actually zero illegal. So this means that in the Amazon biome, you're looking at allowing 20% of a property to be deforested, and in the rest of the legal Amazon, that's actually 65% of a property. So these are pretty key differences. And there have been previous studies that have covered these. The first looked just at the property supplying committed slaughterhouses and found deforestation rates went down, but didn't control for the deforestation beyond those properties. And then there's been 2 subsequent papers that looked at these leakage mechanisms due to the complexity of cattle supply chains and the number of indirect suppliers, to basically find that these leakage pathways nullify the effect of these commitments. But none of these studies have control for market share, something which has been theoretically identified as really important. So why does market share matter for zero deforestation commitments? Well, if you're a farmer, you have a choice. You have a choice to either sell to a zero deforestation committed slaughterhouse or to someone who will let you deforest the entirety of your property. And as the market share of those companies increases, that should basically increase the cost of finding someone to sell to. You're going to have to go further, perhaps accept a worse price or a worse weight for your cattle. And the other major cost is that as more and more people commit to these things, the cost of hiding or laundering your cattle as deforestation-free should also increase, which basically means that the profitability of deforestation should decrease and deforestation rate should also decrease. So this is something that's been theoretically identified but not tested, and we have this type of zero deforestation commitment with clear leakage pathways that so far has been seen to be potentially ineffective. So this makes a great case for testing both the theory and this important zero deforestation commitment. So the research question here is, what is the relationship between increases in the market share of zero deforestation committed companies and deforestation in our study region, which is the states of Pará, Rondônia, and Mato Grosso, which using 11 years that cover both before and after these commitments were signed, and covers 75% of the cattle herd of the legal Amazon and 80% of the deforestation in that same region over our time period. And importantly, it includes areas both of the Amazon biome and the legal Amazon. So we have a region where G4 is not implemented and TAC has different rules. So to work to get a measure of market share, which is at the municipal scale, we use these data here to basically get a, particularly the bottom two, to work out who's operating where and what percentage of demand for cattle they really equate to. So we end up with a variable which is the percentage of zero deforestation committed commitment per municipality, which the methods which I would happily go into later, but not right now. So we get this temporally and spatially explicit measure of zero deforestation commitment market share. I've got 3 key time steps here. 2010 being the first full year after commitments were signed, and then 2013, the first year that TAC spread from the northern state of Pará to these 2 southern states, and then the end of our study period. And the thing that really surprised me as a finding here was that zero deforestation commitments are pretty high across the study region, except in northeastern Pará and northern Rondônia. So these commitments are being widely implemented. And then we use this variable in a panel regression with deforestation as our dependent variable and control for public regulations, which is essentially the percentage of a municipality protected and the likelihood of those protections being implemented, along with cattle density, forest area, and a dummy for the Amazon biome, which allowed us to have an interaction effect to see how the market share of these commitments works differently inside and outside the Amazon biome. And this is what we found. So what you're looking at here is a figure of the size of the coefficient for each of our variables and whether or not the standard error intersects with 0. So the big takeaway here is that inside the Amazon biome, the market share of these commitments has a negative relationship with deforestation. The second thing is that this is about 5 times smaller than public regulations. So although these commitments really matter, they matter less than public regulations. And then the third thing is that these same companies, or the market share of these companies outside of the Amazon biome, so here we're thinking about TAC, is actually positively associated with deforestation. So increases in their market share means that there's more deforestation. And we can break this down by commitment. So when we look at TAC and G4 separately, what we find is both that the impact of commitments go down, but also that G4 alone is not significant. It doesn't significantly explain any changes in deforestation, which I think is pretty interesting. So also, public regulations does increasingly more as we artificially restrict these zero deforestation commitments. So what have we found here? I think there are 2 key findings and 2 questions for further research. The first is that these commitments can and are reducing deforestation where their market share is high. And the second is that these are less impactful than public regulations. And then the 2 questions. The first is that why doesn't G4 affect deforestation? Well, I think there are 2 potential options or answers here. The first is that reputational damage affects company decisions less than legal ramifications, which I don't think really is the case here because, as people have talked about, these companies do care about their reputations. But G4 consistently has half the market share in each location, pretty much, of TAC, as you can see here from the average market share across the study region. And then the other question is that why do these commitments, specifically TAC, increase deforestation outside the Amazon biome? So either we have quite compelling evidence for leakage from the Amazon biome being pushed south, or this zero illegality where you can deforest 65% of your property isn't really enough to change business as usual. Or, of course, other explanations that I would happily hear. So the recommendations I think this research leads to is that these commitments are going to be more successful when they control larger segments of local markets and are complemented by supporting public regulations. So companies that are thinking about making commitments should do so collectively and work with local governments. But I think the other key takeaway here is that there actually already is a collective agreement that is zero gross, which is the G4, which if it had a higher market share would likely have a bigger impact. So getting more companies to sign up to this existing zero gross seems to be the easiest route to reducing deforestation for the cattle sector through zero deforestation commitments. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Floris from Unilever. That was a very interesting talk. I was wondering, at what level did you cluster the standard errors in your panel data regression?
Yeah, so they are robust at the municipal level. So there's definitely work to be done there in terms of the finalized regressions, yeah.
And have you tested for autocorrelation?
Yeah.
What did you find?
Yeah, it was not autocorrelated.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, that was a great presentation. Thank you. My question is, there's been some really interesting work on this idea of a pollution haven where farmers are moving to less regulated areas, and I'm wondering if you have reason to suspect that as market share is increasing, farmers are potentially looking for where there's lower market share.
I am not really an expert on these movements, but based on like field work I've done, farmers have been talking about areas they want to expand into in Paraguay or Bolivia, often in the Chaco, as has been discussed. But in terms of getting this in a quantitative way, I can't answer.
Hi. I wondered if you guys considered implementation of the TAC, because I understand that a lot of the slaughterhouses aren't monitoring yet or weren't monitoring until recently, and if how that affects the results.
That's a great question. If there are data on the variance in implementation at the slaughterhouse level, I would love to have that because I could easily incorporate that into this. But currently, the only way that's being included is just to say that we have the date in which each slaughterhouse signed up to TAC, so that these will change year by year, but not in terms of when they actually start implementing TAC. But even without that, there's a negative relationship to deforestation.
Hi, Fernando from Brazil. So if the tax of working and cattle ranching is by far the most intense driver of deforestation in the Amazon, why deforestation is increasing in the Amazon right now? It's a kind of paradox. If the tax are working, it should be the opposite.
Well, all these results are saying is that where market share is higher, there is relatively less deforestation. So that without these, there would have been a greater amount of deforestation, not necessarily that deforestation isn't going up. These, the years that we use to go up to 2016, which is really doesn't capture the full spike. So I don't know if that would change our results, but I've tried a lot of different permutations and they're pretty robust, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Great, and then maybe if Aline could come up and...
Excuse me, for me it's just a clarification question. Which is the difference between ZDC or zero deforestation, how do you call it, commitment and G4?
So the G4 is a zero deforestation commitment. TAC is often described as one, but it's zero illegality. So, so basically the literature on these commitments treats both as zero deforestation commitments with different parameters for what zero means. But yeah, I guess it's debatable whether TAC is an actual zero deforestation commitment.
Sorry, the issue is not the TAC and the zero deforestation, is the G4 and zero deforestation, because you have different conclusions for both groups.
Yeah,
one
so-
group supports non-deforestation, the other doesn't.
Sure. I mean, so what I was, oh, it's gone. Okay.
But afterwards you can explain me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's do this one. Oh, that's how it works.
Okay. I'm not going to use this.
Does that work?
Okay, is it working? Yeah. So good morning, everyone. I'm Aline Soterroni, and I'm going to show quantitative numbers on the impact of the Soy Moratorium expansion beyond the Amazon to the Cerrado biome based on land use modeling. These are the co-authors of this study, our research institutions and the funders. Brazil, as you know, is the largest producer of soybeans. But where do the soybeans grow in Brazil? If you look, observe the official statistics for this period, we can see that soybean expansion actually took place in half of the soybean expansion happened in Cerrado rather than in the Amazon. And within Cerrado, 70% took place in Mato Piba. And Cerrado is a biome in Brazil that's much less protected than the Amazon. It receives much less attention, and it's a biodiversity hotspot. It's the room of the agricultural boom, and it has less than 20% of undisturbed remnants. It's also the birthplace of waters in Brazil. And when we look at the deforestation or conversion numbers for the both biomes, we see a decreasing trend in the Amazon numbers for deforestation, but we don't see the same in the Cerrado. And in some years, the deforestation or conversion in the Cerrado was even higher than in the Amazon, but it didn't receive too many attention as the Amazon. So Cerrado needs urgent action. And some people say that Cerrado is already it's going to be extincted. Yeah. So our main research question is, what would be the impacts of the Soy Moratorium expansion beyond the Amazon to the Cerrado biome in the future during this time frame, 2020 to 2050? To answer this question, we are using a regional version of a land use model called GloBiome that has been developed at TIASA. Our regional version is called GloBiome Brazil. So GloBiome is an economic partial equilibrium model that covers the main sectors of the land use economy to achieve the demand for products, and we are using the socioeconomic pathway SSP2. The regional version, we has been working on this to refine the model in order to capture the Brazil's specificities. Due to time constraints here, I cannot go deep into the details in the model. But hopefully speaking, these are the model steps. We have the base year for 2000, and then we have projections for every 5 years. And for the projections from 2005 to 2015, we can check with the observed numbers. Then we have the validation. And I selected some indicators here for soybean area and production in Brazil. When we compare GloBiome Brazil results with IBGE, we can see in 2015 the differences are smaller than 2%. Another indicator here is the accumulated deforestation in the Amazon. So here we have the satellite data, and this side is the model estimates. And it's important to say that GloBiome is not using previous deforestation to fit the model. You're not using historical deforestation to predict the future deforestation. The deforestation here is happening to attend the demand of the market, mainly beef and soy in the model. And this is our attempt to validate the deforestation or the conversion in the Cerrado. We have two sources here for conversion in the Cerrado, INPE in red and LAPIG in green. They do not match. And our estimates coming from the model are in between. So after we have a model that's calibrated, validated, we start the scenarios for policy evaluation. And here in this study, we are interested in a scenario where the soy moratorium is expanded beyond the Amazon. But this scenario was built upon a baseline scenario, and I tried to make a picture here, a diagram to explain what are the main assumptions behind this scenario. So for the baseline, we have legal deforestation control in the Amazon and the Mata Atlântica, not in the Cerrado. And we put the Amazon's Soy Moratorium after 2005 because it's working there, so we considered it in our baseline scenario. And why this configuration of governance? With this governance in the baseline, we could capture the trends in deforestation for the historical period. So we have a scenario that captures the historical trends, and on the top of the baseline, we put the soy moratorium in the Cerrado. The only difference between these two is the soy moratorium in the Cerrado. When we make a comparison or a difference between these two scenarios, we have the impacts of the soy moratorium in the Cerrado. And the starting date we consider 2021. We also choose the forest code because farmers and the soy industry, they usually say that they already have the forest code to comply with. So why do they need additional punishment as the soy moratorium? So then we choose the forest code as well. Before talking about the avoided conversion due to the expansion of the soy moratorium to Cerrado, I think it's important to see the future expansion of soybeans in Brazil. So, according to our baseline scenario, the soybean expanded in the past and it will continue to expand in the future, 17 million hectares, and 76% of this increase will happen in Cerrado, not in the Amazon. And if we see our production, soybean production for 2025, we can also see that our future trends for production is in line with other outlooks, other studies, which give confidence in our future estimates. So now, oops, no, okay. So this is the avoided conversion of from native vegetation to soy in the Cerrado from 2021 to 2050. I think it's taking some time to load the figure. Okay. So the conclusion is, with this expansion of the soy moratorium to the Cerrado, this zero deforestation agreement can prevent the conversion of 3.61 million hectares of native vegetation to soy. And the forest code would prevent 0.93. So the forest code is not enough to prevent the conversion from native vegetation to soy. And soy is a major driver of conversion in the Cerrado. When you look at the production number in area and million tons, we have here the baseline and the soy moratorium expansion scenario for 2050. For 2020, both models are the same. After 2020, they are different. So the first key message here is that the soy moratorium will not prevent the soy expansion in area and production in Brazil. When you look per biome, in the Cerrado, we see a decrease in area due to the application of the soy moratorium there, 2.1 million hectares. But then, when you look at the national level, this decrease in the Cerrado, soybean area in Cerrado will go to other regions. And at the national level, the decrease will be 1.1, according to this scenario. And this represents only 2% of the soybean area projected for 2050. And here we have, look at these bars as the total deforestation in the Cerrado. And since we have a model and land use classes and the transitions from one class to another, we can split the deforestation per transition. So we have native vegetation to soy, native vegetation to crop, and native vegetation to pasture. By construction, the soy moratorium expansion scenario doesn't have the native vegetation to soy. 3.6 million hectares of avoided conversion. but it's not directly transferred for the soil moratorium scenario. Why? Because there are leakage. You prevent the conversion from native vegetation to soy, but this agreement, it does not prevent the conversion to crops or pastures. And then, take into account these indirect effects, this leakage, the soy moratorium expansion to the Cerrado would prevent 2.3 million hectares of conversion. We also did a risk analysis based on trace data set that many of you know here. We took the market share from trace by company, also associations and consumer market, and we crossed this with the projections for avoided native vegetation conversion. And then we calculated the future risk of deforestation based on trace data and inspired by the trace yearbook, but using this future deforestation projected by this model. So the risk for Louis Dreyfus is small in the future. Amagi is 7%. This is absolute risk. And the association Abiov and Anek, 0.5%. The key message here is that instead of targeting one company, it might be interesting to target an association. And in the Amazon deforestation in the Amazon was signed by Abiov and Anek back in 2006. So here we have the numbers, absolute in the bars and relative in the dots. And it's interesting to see that Amagi is the company with the high risk of deforestation in relative numbers when you take into account the volume of soy sourced. And when you look at the destination or the consumer market regions, we see that the internal market in Brazil plays an important role in deforestation or conversion in the Cerrado. And here it's interesting to see that China and European Union, besides China imports much more soy from Brazil, from Cerrado, than European Union. In relative numbers, they are pretty much the same. It means that European Union is buying less, but close to areas that are prone to be converted, have native vegetation conversion in the future. Okay, so the expansion of the soy moratorium to the Cerrado biome with this land use model shows that it would prevent 3.6 million hectares of direct conversion. Taking into account leakage effects, it goes to 2.3. It means 36% of reduction due to leakage effects. The soybean area in Brazil by 2050, when the soy moratorium expansion is in place in the Cerrado, will be 2% smaller than the predicted by the baseline scenario. The risk analysis can indicate the entities that should be targeted, and Mato Piba is a region that should be focused on. And last but not least, the forest code is not enough to protect the Cerrado vegetation. The forest code, the levels of protections of the forest code in the Cerrado, they are small. It goes from 20 to 35%. We also have enforcement issues. And there is one study in the Amazon part of Mato Grosso that shows farmers, they comply with the soy moratorium, but they do not comply with the forest code. And when the governance is weak, and that's what we are facing in Brazil nowadays, when the governance is weak, the private sector could play an important role, especially for the Cerrado biome, that is a biome, the most biodiverse savanna in the world, that have less than 20% of undisturbed remnants. So Cerrado needs urgent action. Thank you.
So you have time for one or two questions.
So thank you for a very nice presentation. I was wondering, could you explain how you use the trades data again? Because you show high risk for Amagi, and it looked like the map was showing that Amagi had very high risk, particularly in Mato Piba.
We used the market share per pixel from trace.
Yeah.
That's in municipality level, right?
Okay.
and we cross it with our future deforestation projected by the baseline scenario.
Okay. So just, well, maybe we can talk afterwards, but just to comment that, so you don't have, so Margi doesn't have facilities in Matapipa. They have facilities through a, or, correct me if I'm wrong, Ben.
No, it's the old data set.
Okay.
Yes, we are using the 2.2 collection.
So essentially they have a subsidiary which operates there, which previously was incorporated under their name, but has since been separated out. It's, I mean, the same thing applies, but it's a separate company.
Okay.
And
so
it's
it will
a
be nice to
subsidiary with
update the
Louis
trace
Dreyfus,
data set.
which you give a very low deforestation risk to, but they own 30% of the company.
Hi, Aline. Thank you for a very nice presentation. I have two small questions. First, do you include the offset of current deficits with the forest code in your BFC scenario, forest code scenario? And if so, how does it impact avoided deforestation? And did you also consider a combined scenario, a scenario combining the forest code and the soy moratorium?
Okay. The forest code scenario, the forest code would work on all sectors, in the deforestation for all classes, but the levels of protections are small. So, and also in Cerrado, there is an enforcement issue. If we consider a forest code scenario that's fully implemented, then you can have a decrease in deforestation, overall decrease in the conversion, but it's not fair to compare with the forest code because of enforcement issues. It's not really happening, and it can give a wrong message to the field. Obviously, what would be the most interesting here is to have a mix of policies, not only a zero deforestation agreement, but also the soy moratorium with the forest code would be great for Cerrado. But so far, since the governance is very weak, and we think the soy moratorium, it will be more easy to be implemented in the Cerrado than the cattle moratorium, which is by far more complex to be implemented there. And since the Cerrado needs urgent action, we think that the soy moratorium should be applied soon. We already have all the methodology for tracking the deforestation in the Amazon, so we think it will be easily transferred for the Cerrado. And since the governance is weak, every day hectares of Cerrado has been disappearing in Brazil. So.
Maybe time for one quick question while the next speakers, I think it's Amintas, are you presenting next? If you could come on down and we'll do the mic while.
So the one thing that was missing, it's very interesting, great work. The one thing that's missing to me is what role you're expecting in the intensification of pasture systems to play in this, and what potential rebound effects that might have on deforestation. So, yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's in there, but that's going to be the biggest driver probably of what deforestation happens.
Okay, there is an intensification trend in the baseline scenario, which is, I think, according to our model, 20% for this period. And to see what is the intensification on the top of the soy moratorium expansion, we have to compare these two scenarios. And then the amount of soy that's going to be over the pasture is only 1 million hectares through this period. And the total pasture area in the Cerrado is 60 million hectares, 60. So a very small intensification could spare land for the soy to expand on pastures already cleared land.
Yeah, my point was just that by intensifying the cattle, it could make it much more profitable and therefore increase your scenarios for how much the pasture, we can talk about it.
Yeah. Intensification, cattle ranch intensification is the key mechanism for having production and protection in Brazil. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, just unmute yourself.
Hello. Hello. Good morning. Good afternoon. Hi, my name is Amintas Brandao Junior. I am a PhD student at the University of Wisconsin, Madison. Dr. Holly Gibbs is my advisor. And today I will share some ongoing results. This is a preliminary results of an ongoing research where we are mapping the cattle properties under the supply chain in the Brazilian Amazon, and also understanding how far the cattle has to travel from farms that have deforestation to reach the slaughterhouses that sign it or did not sign it, the agreements. So a little bit of context, Sam covers a little bit as well. So the zero deforestation commitments is starting roughly in 2009 with the G4 in the Amazon region. So this is the Brazilian Amazon region in Brazil. This is, in fact, the limit of the legal Amazon. The green part is most of the legal Amazon biome. And the main goal of the agreements is to exclude from the cattle supply chain the properties, the suppliers that are tainted with deforestation, forced labor, and bargain from IBAMA, and are overlaying with protected areas. There are two types of agreements. One that is the tax, signed with the federal prosecutors, aimed for zero legal deforestation. That means that they can still clear under the limits of the Brazilian Forest Code. And the second is the G4, signed with major meat packers at 2009. And it covers the Amazon biome and aims for zero illegal deforestation. Previous research developed by our group have measured the impact of the agreements on deforestation and found that G4 is being more effective in controlling deforestation than TAC, mostly in the state of Pará. But this study also found some signs of laundering. That means cattle from non-compliant farms are being laundered on compliant farms with G4. And a more recent study found that the implementation of the cattle agreements is too narrow because it's focused in just specific, very few plants and monitors only the direct suppliers. The conclusions from this is that we need to increase the monitorings to include indirects and also include the monitorings for more meat packers. The challenge is that the cattle supply chain in Brazil is quite complex. So the cattle has to travel between different farms in all stages of the production. So for the breeding, usually the breeding happens in one farm, and then it moves to another farm for hairy, and then to another farm for fattening, and then it goes to the slaughter in the meat process. So it's very complex to keep track the movement of this animal. Luckily, Brazil has a data that is used by sanitation purpose to monitor the impact on the foot and mouth disease. This is the GTA. And we believe that GTA has the potential to help us to better understand the complexity of the cattle supply chain. And since from the last 3 or 4 years, the lab has been investing a lot of energy in trying to understand the disconnections of the cattle supply chain. And we downloaded all the GTAs available in the state agencies from the public websites. So this is one example of public access of the GTA in the state of Mato Grosso, where you can download and access the PDF or WAV information from the from to and information from the volume of cattle that is being transported, the type of transportation type, the age of the animals, and so on. So we have archived more than 3 million GTAs that covering the timeline between 2013 and 2018 for the states of Pará, Mato Grosso, and Rondônia. And now, and so once you have the GTA, you can also connect the GTA with another data that is publicly available, that is from the CAR database. CAR stands for Cadastro Ambiental Rural, which is a rural environmental register, where you will find information from some states, the states of Pará and Mato Grosso mostly, the boundary of the properties, and also information about the owner, including the farm name, the farm owner, the CPF. So these are information that are necessary to make the links between the GTAs and the car. And we have developed some automatic scripts that are combining the car properties with the GTA. So it's a series of sequential scripts that are doing this combining automatically. But the main connectors are the farm name, the farm owner, the municipality, and the owner identifiers, including the CPF or CNPJ. This is one example of the relational database that was built to find those connections and to organize the data. And once you have this data organized, you can combine that with other layers like deforestation from PRODES, the embargo list from IBAMA, overlay with protected areas, and actually measure the compliance with the agreements and other in terms of monitoring. So based on this data, we were able to match half of the GTAs of the properties from the GTAs. We were able to match half of the properties that we found in the GTA to a car property. And this map shows what we matched so far. So for the first time, we are now can see the direct and indirect suppliers of cattle from Brazil, from the Brazilian Amazon, covering the state of Pará, Mato Grosso, and Rondônia. And based on the GTA connections, so the purpose that the cow is moved between the suppliers, we can classify the properties as direct suppliers, which are those ones that send the farm, that move the cattle to a slaughterhouse for slaughtering purposes. The indirect suppliers that sometimes move the cattle for slaughter purpose, but also move for other purposes among the supply chain. And the indirect suppliers that never sell to a slaughtering purpose within this time period. And based on this data, we started to assess how this distance also identify the locations of the slaughterhouses. So each point here is a slaughterhouse that we found both in the GTA and also combining with other sources from LAPIC, for example, from Amazon, and etc. And then they started to classify the slaughterhouses if they sign it, which are the black dots, or they didn't sign it, the agreements. And based on this data, based on the property, the GTA information, the type of connection, and the slaughterhouse location, we are now starting to assess the connections, because roads is the main type of transportation used by the cattle sector. 99% of the transaction actually use the roads. And now we are starting to find what are the potential roads that are probably being used by the slaughterhouse sector, the cattle sector. So in the background, we have a roads map in light gray. Here are the properties that are direct suppliers that sold to this slaughterhouse. And the green line here is the least cost path that connected that direct supplier to a slaughterhouse. So now instead of Euclidean distance, with a straight line distance, now we have the actual roads used, distance based on the roads. And based on that information, we combined data from land cover maps to assess if the properties, if the farms with deforestation, they had forests in 2009, which means they could have deforestation. And we divided those properties, direct supplies, in two groups. Those that did not deforest, they had forest in 2009, but they didn't deforest. And the second group, that had forest in 2009, but they did deforest. And then we estimated the volume, which are the bars, the volume of heads that was sent to slaughterhouses, in this case, that were signed the cattle agreements. And then we estimated the average road length between that supplier and the slaughterhouse. Summary of this graph, we found that the slaughterhouses are buying more volume, so they are buying more heads from farms that did not deforested after 2009, and they are located up to 50 kilometers from the slaughterhouse plant on average. If that farm deforested after 2009, that farm had to travel more, compared with that one that did not deforested. And we found a similar result with the farms. When a farm's trying to sell to a slaughterhouse that did not sign the cattle agreements, we found a similar result as well. So slaughterhouses are buying more from farms that are located near to the plant. Something happened here. Up to 50 kilometers to the plant, and did not deforested since 2009. And then there's those that did deforested after 2009, they have to travel more to sell their production. These are all preliminary results. We are now trying to understand the causality effect, what is causing this behavior, and improving the map of roads as well. But the three major conclusions from this study so far is, first, it's technically possible to match the GTA with the car. We did that with 3 million, after assessing the 3 million GTAs from the database. The second results that we found, that slaughterhouses covered by the agreements, they are more frequently from farms located near to plants, up to 50 kilometers, without recent deforestation. And the third major conclusion is cattle from farms with deforestation, they have to travel farther to sell the production, which could be an indication of leakage, but we are still assessing that hypothesis. And thank you. Yeah.
Maybe one or two questions.
Congratulations, Amintas, for the very good presentation.
Thank you.
I think you are really in the good direction, working with this database, GTA?
GTA, yeah.
With the GTA. I'm old enough to remember the time of when Brazil could not export beef because of the foot and mouth disease. And 2 decades ago, the government took the decision to have zero tolerance with the sanitary regulations in Brazil. It was very difficult, it was painful, but today Brazil is the largest exporter of beef in the world. So in my opinion, we must follow the same path with deforestation. It's, I think, the technical path is already there. Mm-hmm. The same approach we did with foot and mouth disease, we can do with illegal deforestation in the beef supply chain, mm-hmm. Definitely. The only thing that is lacking right now in Brazil is political will. So it's not a question, it's a comment, but I really would like to work together with you and your group.
Yeah,
on this issue, because I think that's the future.
Yeah, I agree with your comment that the problem now is not information, it's not data. Brazil has enough data to understand in depth what is going on with their supply chain. We have models, we have cutting-edge monitoring systems, we have good researchers, we have good partnerships with the company. Brazil, Amazon is a test bed for different types of policies with the market. So now we need to work better with implementing all this goodwill and all this good environment that we built in the country.
Maybe I'll ask you an actual question.
Sure.
I'm curious, so the interpretation that you had for that distance result was largely that this might be indicative of leakage. For me, the first reaction that I have is it might be indicative of the fact that slaughterhouses are located in kind of consolidated, agglomerated places. The frontiers are where the deforestation happens, which is generally going to be further away. And so I'm curious if you've looked at that, trying to unpack that causal relationship, or whether it's just this correlation that the landscape plays out in that way.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because that's the first reaction that people get. because to account of that, one treatment that we did was to select only properties that had forests in 2009, which are mostly located in the same region, in the frontier region. So that excludes the properties in the old frontier of deforestation, which are mostly clear right now. So that's one thing. But we didn't estimate it yet, the causal effect. So I don't have an answer right now, but it could be leakage, it could be something else, could be accessibility as well. So these properties are located without access to good roads or a dense roads network. So it could be many things at this point.
Allow for one more question. Isabel, maybe we could, yeah, great. And we'll set you up while Ignacio asks the last question.
I am interested in to know if there are some kind of environmental gradient that organize the route of the cows in this area, from the breeding, pattering places, or there are not. If there are some gradient in relation, I don't know, with the productivity of the pasture or the environmental condition that organize the route of the cows from the breeding area to the lake.
Yeah, that's in fact a new line of research that's being built in partnership with the University of Minas Gerais. In fact, we are trying to understand the age groups of cows and how that relates with the productivity. So that is something that is going on right now. This type of, based on the GTA, because we have the group ages of the animals, we can estimate, we can use that as a proxy for productivity. So older animals, we need pasture. Younger animals we need to be confined at some point. So we are trying to see how that is related with the suitability of the pasture to be intensified. But this is still under assessment. Okay. Okay. Yep.
So now we'll have Isabel, who's going to be presenting a full talk and then a flash talk. So we'll rapid fire too.
Does it working? Yes, I think so. So, hi everyone. So I will present the Soy Moratorium in Brazil from the perspective of the evolution of the governance and the verification system and the future challenges. So I will speak about people. So I will change a little bit. It's not modeling, it's not mathematics. I will speak about power balance and so on. So that's it. I'm Isabel, and my colleagues, Marina Piatto, Lisandro Inakaki, helped me to put this data together. Very quickly, this is only to show you the context with deforestation evolution, and also some policies or government measures that you had in these years. So this PPCDAN, it's a federal plan to fight deforestation and to offer some economic alternatives to not deforest. And Soy Moratorium comes here in this year. And another phase of this PPCDAN, this federal plan, is going on, but we don't know now how it will be with the new government. So just to put some policies. So I'd like to stress the institutional environment. So before Bolsonaro's presidency, we had some interesting government command and control measures. For instance, a specific secretary to forests and to fight deforestation inside the Ministry of Environment, a multi-stakeholder committee to manage this federal plan that I mentioned before, led by the civil house of the president. So really in the top, we can say the top of government, trying to coordinate all the ministers. National, PPCD, national plan to fight deforestation, and also states plans to fight against deforestation. And government, people from government participating in private multi-stakeholder groups. And now, this year, we have more or less a try to destroy these important institutions and weaken organizations, also civil organizations. For instance, threatening with to block the funding. For instance, my organization, Imaflora, has a funding with Amazon Fund to work with indigenous people, but also with other smallholders. So that all is blocked now. The government, Ministry of Environment is analyzing these projects. So, and you have some threats to the forest code also. Now you have the son of the president, that is a congressman, signing a law project to abolish all legal reserves. It's a law project that you try to pass it. So that's the context. Our questions. We have still private groups, private organizations. So what the current governance for Soy Moratorium? That's my focus. And what verification in audit systems we are operating, and what future challenges. So you know a lot of things that this table shows. I will focus really in the evolution of governance regarding people. So it's interesting to remember that Soy Moratorium at the very beginning was only Greenpeace and ABIOV and ANEC fighting each other. Now we have 31 companies from 2 associations, ABIOV and ANEC, and you have WWF, TNC, Imaflora, Earth Innovation, and IPAM sit around the table in negotiation. We had, until last year, sorry, I'm so silly with these things. We had MMA, so the Ministry of Environment, and now you don't know. So, a little bit about implementation. So, ABIOV, ANEC, and some NGOs invest to pay the monetary costing. So, we have a joint monitoring. We have 3 blacklists per year. We have annual independent auditors. We have a committee to analyze the robustness of the report auditors. We have protocols now for auditors that are reviewed in an annual basis, and you have also training for auditors. So that system has evolved, and it is a dynamic system. Okay, some progress and limits. Soy Moratorium cover almost or 90% of the supply chain in Amazon. Direct supplies are monitored. Almost all deforestation is rejected, and it is becoming more and more framed with protocols, auditor training. But it's only Amazon. We have a limited transparency. We have this problem. Oh, it's not possible. It's hard to look at indirect purchase in soy. So that is the indirect suppliers, because you have some intermediaries in some transactions. So there is a confidentiality with commercial information. So we have this gap in Soy Moratorium still. So to finish, future challenges in Amazon. We are fighting to enhance transparency of verification process and audits. Since last year, we have the public report. It's the synthesis of the process of audit published in the website of ABIOV, but it's still timidly. You have to search a lot to find this. This is the link, so to help who wants to see that. It's in Portuguese, it's also in Portuguese, but Google Translator can help. So, and you have to take in account possible context effects. So these all changes with Bolsonaro, these all threats, there is a trend to increase soy in deforested areas. I mean the growth of soy in deforested areas. Until now, it's not so worrying, but important to pay attention to that. So, and finally, Cerrado. An agreement for Cerrado, not for a moratorium in Cerrado, but an agreement to agree to not buy soy and from zero conversion. I see conversion because Cerrado, I think you know, Cerrado have forest physiognomies, but have also vegetation that are not forests. So you say deforestation in Cerrado, you risk it to be interpreted to only not to the forest where there is forests. But we are asking to not convert land on Cerrado. So the agreement is still under negotiation. The working group of Cerrado produced data about trend expansion, risk zones, possible economic incentives, but there are a lot of resistance against a zero conversion agreement without an economic or financial compensation. So traders are fighting more with us in this working group. So, and it's the same people in the same room, but we close the Soy Moratorium meeting, we start the Cerrado working group, and the behavior is completely different. Because it's very important, the production in Cerrado, so they are more powerful now. Greenpeace is no longer on the table of the Cerrado working group. They decided to step out, but most hopes of the NGOs are there. Soy companies with corporate policies can lead the movement even without a group agreement. So we have Luis Dreyfus and also Cofico interested to make an agreement of zero conversion or scaling up for zero conversion. Yes, I think, yeah, that's it. So, thank you.
Great, so we have some time for a few questions.
I have a question not only for you, but perhaps for the others one as well. I noticed that lots of the arguments that are done are based on the traders and not on the producer or the final consumers of the soybeans. And based on your comment as well, I also noticed, and based on Aline, most of the traders are actually not Brazilians. They are either American, Cofico is a Chinese one. Yeah. So I just would like to understand why, because the decision of the production at the end does not lie, of course it's influenced, I understand that, because of the infrastructure, but it's not based on the decision of the traders unless they do have operations themselves. So I just would like to understand the logic also for the simulation. Thank you.
I can start. First of all, at the very beginning, the Soy Moratorium group decided not to incorporate producers. And the argument is traders has the power because they finance in production. I think a quite number of producers. So it's the power to press. So I don't buy if you not change the system. In the Cerrado working group is different. We have, so people invited the producers at the very beginning, and they decided to step out because they don't want to talk about no agreement of zero conversion without incentives. So in Cerrado, it's a shame because they were there, but they are not there anymore.
From the modeling approach, we are not really modeling the trade behaviors. It's ex post analysis. So in our scenario, we are assuming that the whole soy produced in the Cerrado, it's going to be free from conversion. So it's a potential, it's not an exercise, let's say, to see the potential of this agreement. If it's implemented, what would be the avoided conversion, and also in the production, to give some insights and put some numbers on that. But of course, it's not my part, but we have to discuss incentives as well for the producers to put value on their product, to make it interesting, economically interesting for them to comply with the soy, with this kind of agreements, for sure. Yes, it's ex post analysis. We have from the model this potential future avoided conversion, and we have the market shares per municipality, and we combine them. And if the traders are not going to change their behavior, then we have an estimate of what is likely to be the risk for them. If they don't change the way they are working on the field, that would be the risk for them. That was but we are not putting the trade behavior inside the model. We take a best case scenario.
Now I've got a real question. You probably heard about the paper on the trade war between US and China that could affect the Amazon. They project up to 13 million hectares of deforestation, and this could only happen with the collapse of the Soy Moratorium in the Amazon.
Yeah.
Do you think this could happen? But
No.
What's your opinion on this?
Yes, my view is no, I don't think so it will happen. Because traders are our best friends now. I think they know they don't can do that. I don't think so it will collapse.
Okay, thank you.
The one thing that I didn't hear much talked about, but I'm very interested in both talks, is about implementation dates and deforestation cutoffs. Because we keep talking about the soy moratorium like it's just one thing, but it can be defined in the Amazon and the Cerrado, and it can also be changed. So when you look at compliance, the soy moratorium looks like there's high compliance if you take a cutoff of 2009, but then it goes down quite a lot if you take a cutoff of 2006. And so I'm just wondering, in your particular talk, and maybe later you can reflect on it if there's discussion time, you know, when they're monitoring, what are these assumptions about what the cutoff dates are? And when you're talking about the future in the Cerrado, what are they talking about, what the cutoff date will be, and the implementation date?
Yes, for soy moratorium in Amazon, the cutoff date is 2008. It was changed. It was 2006, but it was changed after the approval of the new forest code. And for Cerrado, it's a big discussion. There is no already a consensus about the cutoff date.
Any final questions? Okay. One more, and then we'll go to your flash talk, and we can start this all over again.
I was really interested to hear about the different dynamic between the Soy Moratorium meeting and the Cerrado working group meeting.
Yeah.
And also this reflection that traders are now like the friend of the environmental industry.
Yeah.
And so what I'm wondering is whether it's the same people in that room exactly, because as we've seen from some of the analysis in Trace, there are other companies operating in the Cerrado that aren't in the Amazon, and sometimes these companies are the ones that have the highest risk and are maybe supplying to different markets, specifically in China or elsewhere. So I'm wondering whether it's been possible to bring some of those other companies, perhaps smaller traders with different profiles and different histories, into that Cerrado working group. So not just the Kofkos and the Louis Dreyfus,
yeah.
but perhaps some of the smaller other traders that are operating in the most risky areas.
Yeah, I don't know if I can answer you, because Abiov and ANEC lead the call for participation. So I think that's the answer.
Just a very short comment about the starting date. We also changed this in the model, because in the model it's easy. So we started in 2015 and 2025, and the outcome was that we are going to lose one national EMAS park per year with the delay. It's 140,000 hectares per year.
So we go to the last one. So pretend it's another person, maybe a French one. Okay, 3 minutes. I will try to read very quickly. So, beef now. But I should talk about people and power balance. This is a totally different project, and my group of research from Cerrado, C4, Embrapa, Nexus. It was my previous little enterprise for consultant and research. Now I am in Maflora. But this is a part of the results of my postdoctoral with Cerrado. So my colleagues, my French and Brazilian colleagues. So questions, what you are asking? What the main achievements after 10 years of private and public arrangements in beef sector? What the main failures, and what new NGO approaches. So, the news here is, I will not talk about all of this, it's a lot of information, but the news here is, meat packers are reorganizing themselves. So, G4 agreement is still in place, but Greenpeace stepped out in July 2017, I think, because of the problems with GBS, with justice, but also because Greenpeace is changing their strategies. So G4 agreement is, we call G4 agreement, but now is only the 3 big meat packers, and the tech cattle agreement. So, because meat packers are reorganized, we have a new group called G6. I don't know if you're aware of that. So G6 is GBS, Marfrig, Minerva, Carrefour, Walmart, and Grupo Pão de Açúcar, that's Casino. They are trying to manage both agreements, and there is an expected harmonized monitoring protocol coming this year. They also have to have independent auditors to audit the compliance with both agreements. But now they are trying to add an audit protocol. Imaflora is initial work with these people to build that. So this is a new configuration, And one of the new things that these guys are trying to help the called the small meat packers. And the federal prosecutors are still working with all these people, trying to validate changes in this monitoring protocol and trying to validate now an audit protocol. Because actually there is an audit protocol built by the federal prosecutor, but it's so confusing. It's not in a technical language of audit, so it's very, very confusing with different interpretations. So federal prosecutors are working with the three big ones, but also with other meat packers and also with us, Imaflora and other organizations to try to make better documents and so on. So about progress and limits, all of you know very well this thing. So we have in former G4 and also in G6 really commitment with zero deforestation works only for the three big ones. Indirect supplies are not monitored yet. We have these leakage problems, and we have a weak control of the social aspects. So that's the main limits, despite some progress that we have talked about. So our conclusions. We have a partial enforcement of the TAC. So this is the data from Amazon, from Paulo Barreto. So until 2016, 72 meat packers did not sign the TAC agreement. It's equal 30% of the slaughter capacity in Amazon. So it's a considerable number. We does not effectively control of indirect suppliers yet. We have the enforcement of a minimal level of compliance regarding the forest code. So I think it's very important to stress that the enforcement of CAR, that is our register, is very important, but it's just a picture of the property and based in a self-declaration. So we have to move on to the validation of the CARs to really be sure about what is the state of each property. So there is this policy failures. So remaining forests at various levels of vulnerability. For instance, fires, degradation. So we are not looking at the properties to help them to maintain the forests. So remaining forests, legal reserves are still in dangers. And you have no incentives for intensification based on a more efficient use of a remaining natural resource. So all this talk about incentives, as the lady of Luis Dreyfus said yesterday, she is right. So we go so slowly in this point. And to finish, the risk of smallholder exclusion with ambiguous effects on deforestation. Okay, we all agree, Imaflora agrees and fight for the control of indirect suppliers, but you have a portion of indirect suppliers that are smallholders, that are small, and if you excluded them of the market or of the system, you have more deforestation, probably. So that's to reinforce the argument of Aline. So you need more public policies. This scenario is terrible now, but to make all this be effective, we need to join private mechanisms with public policies that will be effective. It's okay? Okay, thank you. Okay?
Great. So we have 10 minutes for questions, maybe first for Isabel, and then maybe we open it up for broader questions for the rest of the panel. And given the slide behind me, maybe the first question could be from a woman in the room. I'm patient. Great, Kim. Thank you.
Just
Thanks so much for it's loud. Bringing up this question of smallholders. It's something we've been talking a lot about in oil palm supply chains in Indonesia, and it's the first time I've really heard it in Brazil and in other supply chains. So could you explain what you mean by a smallholder? Like, who is that person that could be excluded, and why might they be excluded?
Yes, we are especially talking here about settlers, so settlements in Amazon. So they have small plots, about 100 hectares, and cattle ranch is really important for them. And they are the invisible people in Amazon. And you have a lot of rural settle projects so you have cattle for beef, but also for milk. So it's important to look at these people.
And why would they be excluded? I mean, what's the mechanism, rather than a larger producer from these types of suppliers?
We can imagine if you have a really indirect suppliers control, and they are pretty much abandoned with the policies, so we can exclude them from market. Probably they will find local market, but I think it could be a social problem.
Hi, congratulations on the variety of topics too. My question will be on your honest assessment of the effectiveness of these mechanisms, because a couple of years ago we had this beautifully titled article in the media called Boi Ilegal Não Morre de Velho.
Yeah.
So illegal cattle won't die of old age in the Amazon. And we know about 80% of the production remains in the domestic market that largely is not concerned about sustainability from that beef. And those are the same players that make sure the public policies that we need do not happen through their lobbying. I mean, my political scientist view on this is that they're just fooling around. What's your assessment?
Yeah. So my assessment is not effective. So it's true. So I think the problem is, as you said, we have a huge domestic market. So my interviews showed that all cattle ranchers, large, small, medium or small, can sell their cattle. So selling not stopped. Because of that, I'm against to call the cattle agreement a moratorium on beef. It's not a moratorium at all. So all people is being business, all cattle ranchers being business in Amazon, but you have a little bit more control in the direct suppliers. That's it. But the problem of laundering, the leakage, it's very, very, very huge in beef sector. I don't know if I answered you.
Yeah, I have, I think, maybe a somewhat related question. So maybe this is, you're calling it laundering or leakage, but how easy is it to cheat and like bribe? I see corruption, so I'm really interested in this, like to pay regulators off, and how many people who are actually doing the regulating are cattle or soy producers themselves, and is there any problems that you foresee there?
Sure. So you know that, for instance, I will take the example of the social aspect, the slave labor. If you have few people in surveillance on the ground, and some people accept money not to register an occurrence about that. So we have this huge corruption problem in Brazil. And also with sanitary matters. The operation called carne fria, it's cold meat, has showed that there is problem with this part of the control that's sanitary, that's about health. Brazil is a sad country.
So we'll continue to take questions, but maybe if people can also think more synthetically that address questions to all the speakers, that would be wonderful.
Mine was actually for all the speakers. So, and also that comment from the political scientists about effectiveness. I think what's really important for this entire research group focusing on Brazil is that, and all zero deforestation commitments, is that people really need to be more precise about the language of effectiveness and the dimensions of it, and not confuse things like cheating and non-compliance with leakage. And so where laundering it plays a role, you know, in my mind is more non-compliance than leakage, but people sort of use the words because it was happening before and it continues to happen. But anyway, so I think, and then also additionality isn't very explicitly coming out in the studies as well. So just, it's more of a discussion comment, and I think people could probably go back to their talks and even re-examine their outcomes from those different lenses.
Do any of the speakers have any reactions, or other people have reactions? Do you have a question or a reaction?
Question to everybody, like to the experts in Brazil.
Great, so any responses to that? Great, it's a good challenge for us all to take on. I like it.
Yeah, so I was wondering, because I don't work in this region, and this always kind of inspires me, and I kind of try to relate this to where I work in Africa. And I was wondering, like, when you all say, like, you need to sort of stop what's happening in Cerrado right now, and then you also keep talking about leakage. So what happens next? Like, if you manage to stop what's happening in Cerrado, is it going to, where would it go next? Because I guess all these industries will continue to expand. And I know that it's not your responsibility to come up with answers. We are just researchers, but because simply you all are very passionate about this, I was just wondering, like, for example, when you talk about these issues in Africa, like always land use planning, they talk about, but here I don't necessarily hear about it. So yeah, so that was like a general comment and a question to all the experts working in Brazil.
I'm curious, Aline, do you have any insights from the GLOBIOME model of where leakage would go with the Cerrado moratorium?
In the results we show, we prevented the leakage by construction. We put the soy moratorium in the Amazon, so then we cannot see the leakage there. But our previous study on the forest code, we, for example, when the enforcement is more strong in the Amazon, there is a leakage for the Cerrado, and the other way around. We see this. And of course, we could have leakage to the Amazon, but the question about the soy expansion is that it's really going to happen in Cerrado rather than in the Amazon. Even with this US-China war, for example, it will affect the Cerrado most.
And does GLOBIOME Brazil connect to global?
Yes, it's global. It's global. Yeah. For example, the increasing demand in China has a reflection in Brazil. It takes this into account, and also other parameters and assumptions, constraints, and so on.
One other question I had maybe for many of the researchers working on this is, lately you brought this up with the change in government in Brazil, and I'm curious about the interactions between these private initiatives and the public initiatives, especially when you see these kind of regime shifts in the public government system. And I've wondered whether the kind of interactions between these two systems can provide greater resilience of the overall environmental protection regime, because they kind of are in different cycles, like business cycles don't match up perfectly with political cycles. And I'm curious whether there have been observations about, has the Bolsonaro regime taking power actually weakened any of the the private governance structures, the willingness of corporations to negotiate, or are those still similarly strong even with the Bolsonaro regime in office?
May I try some thoughts? Yes. I think we have two different scenarios for beef sector and soy sector. In soy sector, we are experiencing a lot of permanence of willingness to make better the system of control. But beef sector, we are experiencing again a fight. For instance, the Brazilian Roundtable on Beef is Sustainable, in the beginning of the 2017, last year, has changed one statement, taking out the statement to make the steps to zero deforestation. They said no. There are many NGOs that takes part in the Brazilian Roundtable for beef, sustainable beef. So they really make a fight. Is no, we don't talk about zero deforestation. We want to talk about economic incentives. That's it. And they are very near of the groups of the new government. So we have these different political arenas.
Just to share some ideas, I invite you to think about to remind in the past. So the deforestation in the Amazon decreased by 82% from 2004 to 2012. What happened there that time? We had Soy Moratorium, but we also have the expansion of protected areas. We had the monitoring, the improvement of monitoring systems. We had the blacklist. Municipalities with high level of deforestation, they had, how can I say, the financial credits were limited. So for these examples, one is private sector agreement, all the others, they are more related to the government. Yeah. So in 2 words, political will. What happened in the past to have the decrease in deforestation in the Amazon was more political will. And in the future, with this scenario we have nowadays, and we are seeing the deforestation in the Amazon increase. Last year was the highest in the last decade. What we need a mix of policies, because every time the government changes, we are going to have this. So we have to be a more robust system, not relying only on the public side, but a mixture of them.